Hi, folks. You're Tacit at your Pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. Just before I get into the essay, a little message popped up, and if I've understood it correctly, it was from YouTube offering that if I want to, and I assume this is available for anybody, if I want to, I can shadow ban people that post comments. So they think the comment is there, but actually no one else can see it because it's been effectively shadow banned. I think I've understood that message, and I thought, wow, you've got to be kidding me. So there you go. And given the topic of this video, it's probably probably timely, if not ironic in a way. Now, I just dropped my glasses. I remember as a kid in high school, this would probably be senior high school, where I read, I think for the first time, novels such as 1984. I'm not sure I read the whole thing back then, but anyway, and keep in mind the Cold War is still on at this stage. So we're being taught about totalitarian communist regimes and how totalitarianism is shutting down the free press and not having political parties and not having the rule of law and not having market competition and so on leads to ideology feels when you don't have facts anymore deciding things. And if you have facts, you have reality. If you don't have that anymore, then ideology fills that vacuum. I mean, it wasn't expressed exactly in those words. This is probably an adult deduction of what I was thinking back then. But this idea that ideology, once it replaces facts, distorts and perverts every perception and every action, every allocation of resources, every interpretation of the law, every crime, and so on, is determined through ideology. And again, this is to a large extent now my understanding of today, looking back, rather than what I would have seen it as 15 or 16 years old. But we're in a situation today where facts not only don't matter, but unless they suit the argument of the ideology, but facts don't matter, but lies are now the standard and creating the narrative of the standard. And you can see this sort of almost anywhere. So the assertion method of determining facts is now omnipresent across sort of all discourse. Now, at the time, I thought it was impossible. Excuse me. I thought it was impossible for the dystopia that George Orwell was talking about in the novel 1984, and there are other sort of dystopian views of the future as well around at the time, not just in novel format, but in various movies and so on. I thought it was impossible because the default standard will always be facts. It was my determination then, as it was for some years, that nobody has or would want to invest in blatant lies or untruths or perversions of the truth or omissions of accuracy and omissions of fact and so on. I assume, well, that's the gold standard. And if it did deviate, then the media would pick up on it and castigate anyone that did that, be it a politician, for example, or a public servant. And anyway, if the matter sort of really flared up, it would go into a court of law where facts were the sole determinant of sole determination of what was going to happen. So not that the West didn't have ideology, but the ideology was couched to a much larger extent than any other governmental and legal system in facts and reality and facts in combination representing truth. So and this again was the accepted default standard. It wasn't even the gold standard that you aspired to maybe sometimes to get to. It was the default standard. And if things did waver sort of away from truth or accuracy or facts, then they would default back fairly quickly. And pretty much in all conversations I remember as a kid, facts were the standard. And if you misunderstood something, or if you you didn't know, or you'd misrepresented something inadvertently, there'd always be someone there who would point out, well, the facts of the matter are, such and such and so and so. So that was always where it would default to. Not that there weren't instances where it didn't. The kids in the playground or something like that at school. There are places where facts weren't overly relevant, but these were temporary aberrations that were for children, or for crazy people, or for those who are acting illegally and maliciously, who would be held to account at some point not too far away. Now, it wasn't 100% perfect 100% of the time, so there were still people that came out with howlers and got away with it. So also there were emotional issues. I remember I got a job over the summer holidays, which in the Southern Hemisphere in Australia are December, January, and got a job over the summer holidays while I was still at high school. I was 14. It was some job in a warehouse, and it was like loading up trucks and doing general dog's body type work. I was a scrawny little kid at the time, I remember there was someone had died, the week before, and so and this is reminiscent of, say, modern day COVID type stuff, but the decision was made. Everyone had to wear a black armband. Now, my recollection is that I came after the person had died. I'd never met them. I didn't know them. And so I wasn't wearing the black armband, and the female staff were the most sort of, you have to wear a black armband to show that you care. And it was the Karens, if you like, an early version of the Karens. And they came to me and gave me a hard time. You have to wear the black armband. And even as a kid, I understood sort of, well, hold on a minute. I've never met the guy. I wasn't even working here when he died. So why do I need to? No, I wasn't necessarily against it, but why do I need to wear a black armband type thing? And so, well, if you don't, you'll be shunned, you'll be outcast, you'll be ostracized. No one will talk to you. We'll make sure no one talks to you. And this deputation was quite sort of. And anyway, that was sort of an indication. Well, hold on, the facts of the matter are, it's nothing to do with me. We don't care. This is how it's going to be ideologically and emotionally. This is how we're perceiving it, and you'll fall in line, motherfucker. So that was sort of an early example of. And I noticed that going to work for big corporations, it was their relationship to the facts was patchy at best. They would have their own culture and thus their own perception of what reality was, and a lot of this was based around controlling the staff, controlling the employees. So they had a system of control, and that control was not wholly couched in facts and truth and reality. It was couched in like the cultural ideology of the organization, which again related to control. So but in the wider world, if a politician tried to do it, or someone who was publicly accountable in some way, whether accountable to shareholders, whether accountable to results, or accountable to the public, or accountable to through the media, it could be held up and scrutinized, and talking truth to power, as they say. Then that ability to scrutinize and question and hold to account meant that it defaulted back to truth and facts at some point. Now maybe it took a little bit of time, but it always came back to truth and the facts. Now the same thing goes for market competition. When you're a business competing in the marketplace, trying to offer your goods and services, and there are people expecting, the investors, the shareholders, the board of directors, that are expecting results, and you don't deliver the results, then questions get asked and you're held to account. So you can't live in a fantasy world that is unrelated to the factual reality of having to compete in the marketplace, which means offering better quality goods and services, or better prices, or greater availability, or better distribution. You have to be offering some value add that makes the customer come to you. Now, there can be situations of monopoly and oligopoly, or cartels, things like that. So there can always be those, but then there's meant to be market competition commissions and government departments that say, no, you're not going to, you guys can't all buy up your competition and then avoid competing in the marketplace. We have to have market competition. Now, back from pretty much anywhere you go, you look at British politicians, European politicians, American politicians, Australian politicians. One of the bigger things was, if we're going to have better quality goods and services delivered, and if we're going to have, this is other than, say, public utilities, for example, if we're going to have better quality goods and services, and particularly competitive pricing, we have to have competition, and competition must face reality. And reality, those guys down the road have a better product than us. Wow, we've got to do better. We now have to improve our services or do something to counter that. And so reality had to drive it. Now, in the case of ideology, and I'll use the China or the Soviet Union, Communist China, or the Communist Soviet Union, or Eastern Europe, Communist bloc, or any of those where ideology is the sole driver. Reality only comes into it, facts and reality only come into it if it suits the ideology. It's not the other way around. It's where the facts dominate, and where there's no facts, then ideology would come in. Ideology comes first, and the facts are just cherry picked to suit the ideology, and nobody wants to question or oppose the ideology, because then you're not a good communist, and there's a chance you may be taken out back and shot. So people are pretty motivated to stay with ideology. Now, this can be in allocation of resources, or establishing an entity to manufacture or produce something, or distribute or deliver something. It was all ideological. So the facts were so irrelevant that vast amounts of agricultural goods that the Soviet Union produced just rotted in warehouses, because and they probably had enough food to feed the people, actually, but then they ended up having to import vast amounts, but simply because they couldn't face any factual realities. So if they were producing, vast amounts of vegetables, then there was no refrigerated trucks, or there was no proper warehousing, or the storage areas were in flood-prone plains, so that they would get spoilt by floods, or the refrigerated trucks weren't there, or the roads were so bad because of the rain that the trucks couldn't deliver, or the bridges were so badly made they collapsed in the heavy rains, so the trucks couldn't cross and so on and so on and so on. So if any or all of these things happened in combination, they were fact. Reality was the bridge had collapsed. That's the fact of reality. But if you state that, then someone's going to say, well, I don't care about that. Ideologically, you should have delivered 100 tons of vegetables to here, and you didn't. That means you're a counter-revolutionary. That means you're a fucking Nazi. That means, you're dead, motherfucker. And so nobody would do it. So everyone filled out forms and tick boxes, and imagining a reality that simply didn't exist, ignoring the facts. But because the paperwork all lined up, and because the reports were all handed in on time, and because no one could be blamed for being a bad communist, the facts didn't matter. So by calling out the fantasy, you then became the class enemy. You then became the counter-revolutionary. You then became the Nazi. But pretending the facts didn't exist made you're okay. So this is what happens when ideology creeps in. Now, as a kid, I believe this was impossible. It could never happen. We've got representative democracy. The politicians represent the people, are elected by the people. It's the people from the local area get elected by those people from the local area and sent to the federal parliament to represent that local area. There's simply no chance that the body politic would allow a deviation from factual reality. And assuming, and every now and again, a politician would say something seriously dumb and try and fudge the reality, but the media would be onto it, sort of wham, straight onto it, and would expose the person, expose them to ridicule, point out the error, introduce the facts as they were, and that the politician had clearly and knowingly circumvented the truth and the facts and the reality, and then they would be pilloried because of it. And I remember, some politicians were so acutely embarrassed by not getting away with their lies that they ended up being, dumped by their party or resigning in disgrace and in humiliation and so on, ridiculed for years afterwards for their stupidity and so on and so forth. So, but this has changed. Now, I believed it was impossible for the West to end up going in an ideological direction. There were just too many safeguards, courts. But we need to accept the reality today that all of them have gone. And the courts have been stacked with activist judges. The media is now, other than tiny sections of it, 95% of the media is completely controlled by the globalists. The major corporations have been captured by the globalists. The body politic is just completely, or pretty much completely, captured by the globalists. And the unions, the public service institutions, and lies, that the ideology has replaced facts, truth, reality, and events are now depicted with brazen lying. For example, the police in January 6th claiming that police were killed, police were injured by right-wing fascist Nazi mobs and all this sort of, and the lies that were told there. So these police that were claiming were never injured, they were never killed, and yet the lies were absolutely constant. The mainstream media pushing it, the body politic pushing it. The institutions pushing it. Everyone was pushing it, all knowing that it was a lie, all knowing that there are multiple lies there, but pushing it nonetheless. These things couldn't have happened years ago, well, certainly not to this extent. So we need to understand that once facts and reality and truth start to be neutralized, an ideology will fill that vacuum, which is where we are today. So if you point out that climate change is a scam, then you're a Nazi. If you point out that race hustlers and race grifters are telling the most terrible howlers and lies about black, white, and so on, Jewish, Gentile, race, and gender conflict and ginning and all that sort of stuff up. If you point out that it's all lies, exaggerations, and so on, then you're the Nazi, you're the bad guy. So now pointing out the lies, pointing out the untruths, pointing out the carry-on is now where you'll be accused of being bad and wrong and evil and Nazi, fascist, Hitler, and white supremacist, and so on. So it's a complete inversion of where it was, as I remember it as a kid. And again, it would have seemed impossible. Now, this was something that, coming back now to George Orwell's 1984, when this dystopian future was proposed, it was very much influenced by what was happening in the communist world, which I thought will never happen in the West. It'll only happen amongst those crazy communist ideological Marxist fanatics. It'll never happen anywhere else. And yet here we are. It's actually happened. Now, there hasn't been a bloody revolution where people have been killed en masse, but if the globalists don't get their full control that they want, they've nearly got it. If they don't get the full control they want, that's the only next step. That's the only other thing they can then do. There isn't anything else they can then do. So it's not a good look as we sort of peer into the future from where it is now, given this inversion of reality, the inversion of truth, and the facts no longer matter. And if you point out facts to anybody that deviates from the narrative, the ideological narrative, then you're Hitler. That's just it. That's how it is now. That's the insanity of the times that we're living in. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.